Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm Laurie Bull. Each year the process of passing the state budget is the same, but the issues surrounding it, they may change from time to time, and that is the case this year. Here to talk more about it is State Representative Warren Kampf, representing Chester County and one more that I forgot, Montgomery County as well. Welcome.
Hi, Laurie.
We are nearing that budget time that we come to every year, and Pennsylvania is required to pass it on time and balanced, unlike the federal government. Just some of your thoughts on where we're at in the process and what it's looking like for this year.
So the end of June is our deadline because we're on a fiscal year that ends in June. We start up the new year, the beginning of July. The governor, as he's done in the past, introduced his concepts for the budget in February. There's been lots of discussion, and now a bill has been introduced in the House just recently. It's somewhat different, although pretty close, I would say, to the governor's overall budget numbers, spend numbers for the coming year. As I understand it, it includes no tax increases on Pennsylvanians, which is, of course, good in an economy like this. We're still struggling. We still have significant unemployment across the country. But now in the kind of the next 30 days leading up to the end of June, there will be plenty of haggling with the Senate, with individual members of the legislature, and with the administration to get a budget done on time before the deadline.
And of course the budget is based on some projected revenues. Where are we standing currently with those monies that are coming in?
Well, we are on projections for what we thought would be coming in from month to month when we did this last year. Mm-hmm. However, in February, when the governor came out with his projected budget, we were doing better than we have been in the last couple of months. So we are likely to end this fiscal year on budget, right? What we projected in revenues we're going to have, what we projected in expenditures we're going to be at or below. The question will be, are we going to have increased revenues? What's the revenue picture going to look like next year? Mm-hmm. And we're not so sure given the last couple of months, so I think you will find whatever product we end up with in the next 30 days, I expect will be pretty conservative on the concept of what are we going to get in the next 12 months.
Well, this year there's three large matters that are kind of looming and in the background as we're looking at the state budget. Pension would be one of them, transportation the other, and the sale of the state liquor stores and privatizing that system. Let's start first with the liquor store vote. You had a historic vote in the House recently. I mean, really, the whole idea of alcohol sales really hasn't been dealt with legislatively really since Prohibition. So that was a historic vote that took place on the House floor. Can you tell us about that vote and what that bill would do if it becomes law?
Oh, it absolutely was an historic vote. Like you said, I mean, I don't think a bill of that nature had run since they first put the state store system in place in the 1930s. And I was put on the liquor committee in the House this year, so actually that bill was what we worked on in the committee and passed out to the House floor. Essentially what it does is it privatizes the state store system. We actually today, the state runs both the wholesale, so Pennsylvania is a very large purchaser in the international market of liquor and wine, but the state owns the wholesale, and of course we own all of the retail outlets, not the real estate,
right,
but the retail outlets in those malls or wherever they happen to be around the state. So the idea would be over a period of years, I think, although it's not precise, it's formulaic, a short period of time, 4 or 5 years, most of the state stores would be closed down and replaced by private licensees. And the way that would work is in each county, a certain number of wine and spirits licenses would be available for purchase. There are set prices in the legislation. The beer distributors, everybody knows the local beer distributors in their area where they are. They have a sort of a difficult problem on their hands because they're facing competition, and so this does at least give them, at least for the first year, a right of first refusal, a first chance at those liquor and wine licenses. But if they're not able to buy those, then they would be sold essentially on the open market in the counties. And the whole idea there really is to try to make this a private sector driven piece of our economy. There will be tax revenue still, whether it's in the state's hands or in the private sector. There certainly will be jobs still, in the private sector once these businesses are up and running. And I think in my area, most people want competition. They want selection, dare I say. Some of them may actually cross the border into other states for various reasons. So this concept that the legislation has in it is to fundamentally transform us into a private sector market. I think most people in Pennsylvania for decades have wanted that, and that's what this bill does. But now it's in the Senate. I have at least gotten the sense in reading the newspaper and talking to colleagues that we might see a product back in the House from the Senate pretty soon.
Okay.
We'll see precisely what that is, but I think it's high time we did this, and hopefully my colleagues in the Senate agree.
Well, then anytime you're talking about selling off something that the state has, there's money with that. And there's a lot of different ideas of what to do with that money. Can you highlight a few of those ideas of what's being tossed around?
Right. So with the sale of the licenses for liquor and wine, and there are also some other pieces. The piece of the legislation allows large grocery stores generally, to sell wine, and we continue what we call the R license. People in my area may know Wegmans sells beer by the 6-pack or the 12-pack in a restaurant construct. So that would continue. But there's going to be income from that, license sales. That money, we don't say in the legislation that we passed where that goes. It goes into a fund.
Right.
There is a proposal from the administration, the governor's office, to put that into particular concepts in the K through 12 education world that the state does fund. Some I know would like to see it go into transportation, because we have certainly issues with our roads and bridges and transit that could use resources. And we also have a major problem, which I've focused on, kind of a public pension funding crisis. There are those who believe money should go there when we have this one-time revenue come in. So a lot of possibilities, but right now, no clear path.
And it is still in the Senate, so it's not a reality yet anyway.
No. Good idea, but not yet a reality.
Okay. Well, you talked about pension, and that's been of particular interest to you, the problems that we have with those funds for state employees and public school employees. You were asked to chair a task force on that. Can you update us on the progress of that group?
Sure. And the whole idea of the pension problem is pretty complicated, but fundamentally, with the decline in the stock market, pensions are often invested in equities and that kind of thing. The decline in the stock market, a lack of funds being put in by the state and the local school districts over a long period of time, maybe going back about 10 years, and then even back in 2001, a granting of very good benefits, quite different than what you would find out in the private sector. All of that means today we have a real problem with the funding of our pensions. And we are literally putting money in hand over fist to try to keep those funds in decent shape. And that's a part of our problem at the state level. It's also a problem at the local level. The school districts pay about 50-50 with us for the school district pensions, which are also run by the state. Our budget this year does, in fact, spend somewhat more than last year's budget overall. Revenues are expected to go up. The economy is better than it was back in 2008, but not going gangbusters. But so much of that increase, expected increase, is being eaten up by the increased pension costs that we have to go to every line item in the budget, and this is happening at the school district levels, and find savings there in order to be able to put this money into the pension fund. So people have for a number of years, and this year is no different, although we are, I think, in crisis mode now, have been talking about pension reform, changing our pension system in some way. The task force that I'm on is in the House Republican Caucus. There are 5 members on it. We have met periodically over the last couple of months. We have considered a number of different proposals, concepts, educated ourselves. I introduced just recently some legislation on pension reform, maybe we can talk about. But the task force is working at it, as are many parts of the legislature and the administration.
Before we get into your legislation, what would your message be for those who are retired in the pension system?
Yeah, so this legislation, my legislation, the governor has a proposal. I don't know of any legislation that is in any way affecting current retirees. Now, there is some legislation, not my own, that addresses changes to future benefits of current employees. So not what they've already earned, but their future days of service. But nobody is talking about, that I have heard, changing anything with respect to current retirees.
So they can rest well at night.
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
That is true.
Now, your legislation, what does that deal with?
So my legislation says for all future hires at state employees and school district employees, we should go to a defined contribution plan. I introduced legislation like it last session. I have reintroduced it, and since the administration is talking about it, members of the Senate are talking about it, I think we're getting to the point where maybe something on these subjects could actually happen. So for future hires, we create a defined contribution plan. For existing employees, it would be an option, meaning they would exercise it at their option. I believe that some would do that. There is portability in a defined contribution plan, meaning you can go to another employer and take it with you. You can enjoy the benefits of good returns in the stock market, whereas in a typical pension, it's really just a formula, and that's what you receive. So I think there are reasons why people might switch, but it is not mandatory. There's some reasons for that that maybe we can talk about, but fundamentally, that's what it does.
Okay, and then you said the reasons, that somebody may want to switch.
Well, I mean, I think several. First of
Okay.
all, it's portable. A pension is not portable. You can't take it with you and go to another employer.
And continue
It
to
stays
earn.
with you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's number one. Number two, if the stock market goes up and your returns are good, you as the owner of that account enjoy the benefits of that. But in a pension, that's not the way it works. The pension is really run by the state or the company, whatever it is, and you simply get a formula. Your years of service, the amount of your salary, and some other multiplier, and that's what you receive annually for the rest during your retirement. So there are differences, and I think some people would switch because of those things.
Okay. Before we get into the third big issue, which is transportation, I think it's a good time to take a break. I don't want to get into that and have to stop. So when we return, we'll discuss more about some of these budget issues, including transportation and funding of our roads and bridges. We'll be back in just a minute.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. We've been discussing some budget issues, and the top 3 that we're dealing with this year, transportation, pension, and also liquor privatization. I almost forgot the 3rd one. But we had we were discussing pension, and you had a proposal about switching the type of plan and the type of benefits future employees would have with the state and the school. Can you talk about how that type of a plan would benefit the taxpayers?
I think going to a defined contribution plan for new hires benefits the taxpayer because, in the end, we are not putting money in now as taxpayers, and then down the road when, let's say, a subsequent legislature doesn't manage the pension properly, having to, shovel more money in to make that work. A defined contribution plan for the taxpayer, the employer, is to put money in each year at a set amount. 4% is what I propose. That, I believe, is fair to the employee, but also fair to the taxpayer. And at the end of the day, the taxpayer is then not given another bill saying you have to use dollars you might have been using for K through 12 education or the Department of Public Welfare, Human Services, or roads and bridges, those things. No, we can't do those priorities because we now have to make up the difference that wasn't made up in the past. So that's fundamentally the difference. And as long as you give decent advice to individual members, individual employees, and my concept would include that, I think you will provide for a good retirement for employees, teachers, school district workers, which is necessary.
Right.
And so I like that balance that a defined contribution plan provides.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on the task force and the things coming out of it. Let's move on to transportation, our roads and bridges. We have an old system. I mean, we were innovators back in the 30s and whatever with the turnpike and all that thing, but because we built these roads so long ago, they're in need of repair, and in some places, maybe a little bit of down your way, I'm not sure, some of these roads just need to be expanded so they can handle more cars. We have so many more people on the road today. But that all comes at a cost. And of course, that's where the dollars and the hopes and dreams don't quite match up. Can you talk about the problem that we have?
Well, and I think you really described the problem. I mean, we have a lot of needs, right? I mean, down where I am, we have, SEPTA and the transit system. And, there are cost issues with that and management issues from time to time. But it's fundamentally something that we need and use in the area where I live. We have roads and bridges. People have seen all the projects, and they've also seen the potholes, and they've seen the, weight-restricted bridges. I mean, we definitely have needs. Now, there's a lot of money going into that system. I think something annually like $6 billion, although a fair amount of that I think is federal money as well. But the folks who build roads and deal with transit indicate that we are really in a huge backlog. And if we don't do something soon, we're going to face some real problems if we're not already facing them. So there have been proposals. There's a proposal in the Senate, and the governor's office at least came out with a proposal. I'm not sure whether it's been reduced to legislation, but it may soon be, to try to obtain more revenue in order to deal with some of these needs. And the question will be, can the local constituent, whether it's a person or a business, really handle that sort of a new burden in order to deal with some of these infrastructure and transportation problems?
I guess in the governor's proposal, he proposed to uncap this gas and oil franchise tax. So that seems like it's more on the companies, but it does all trickle down, does it not?
Right. So right now the companies pay something called the oil company franchise tax, and I think essentially a retail provider of gas, maybe it's your local gas station, is paying a tax, and that's capped right now. It's been capped, say, since the 80s or the early 90s. So it's got a ceiling on it. Lifting the ceiling off of it would allow the amount of money, tax dollars, to go up and to float with the price of gas. And the question would be, well, are the retailers, are they going to absorb that themselves, or are they going to pass it on at the pump? My sense is they would probably pass some, if not all, on at the pump. And that is the main source of revenue in both of these proposals. Precisely how much of an increase it would be in the price of gas or in the tax, I don't think anybody really knows, although there are some projections. But it would generate more revenue, and that revenue would come from somewhere.
Certainly our roads, bridges, railroad as well. You can't operate a business, you can't attract business to Pennsylvania without having that infrastructure. So it really is a broader issue than just how I get to work every day. It really is a big issue. Do you think, or are you hearing from your constituents, would they be willing to pay a little extra at the pump? Are you getting any feedback from folks whether or not they support some type of increase in that way?
I mean, I would say when I talk to folks about this subject, I hear a couple of things. I hear the yes, I would be willing to pay some more for better roads and bridges and for better transportation facilities. And then I hear no, and the government already receives a great deal of our money. There is waste and inefficiency there. You have a turnpike that's under some cloud. You have PennDOT, which isn't always the most popular agency in the local communities. And why can't they merge? Why don't they do more with what they have? So I hear that. In my area, for example, I have 422, which is a congested roadway, and we also have a project that's been around for a long time in the planning stages called the Paoli Transportation Center. These two places are in need of transportation dollars. So people who use those, at least part of them says, we want transportation dollars available to make that happen. But ultimately, it'll depend on what the package looks like, and talking more and more with my constituents to find out precisely what they want me to do.
Well, we've talked about these three legs to the stool, these three broad issues and matters that are before the legislature and are being tossed around. What's your sense of how they play into the passage of the budget? Do all three of them need to be dealt with before the budget comes? Do any of them need to be dealt with before the budget comes?
These three issues, right? Liquor stores, transportation, and pensions, in part have been on the table for some time.
Right.
All right? The governor has asked, and in some sense linked one or more of them to the passage of the budget at the end of June. Precisely whether any one of them will happen before June 30th, I can't predict. I do think you will see some law on at least one of them, and maybe all three, and maybe all three by the end of the year. That's not much of a prediction,
right,
but I've seen a lot of activity around all three of them and the budget over the last few months, and I would be very surprised if we didn't have some product at the end of the day on, let's say, at least one of them and maybe more.
Well, I won't make you put money down on that or any odds on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then another thing, maybe a fourth thing that's always there. We spend an incredible amount of money on K through 12 education, as we should, to educate our children. What type of issues are there surrounding education funding? Special education funding is always one. Charter schools has also been something that's been in the news a lot as far as how they receive dollars.
So the special education funding, those costs continue to go up. There's a lot of federal law on that. There's some state law. And the school districts are receiving about the same amount over the last few years from the state. But their costs are rising. So we did just pass, and it went into law, I think probably a couple of weeks ago, essentially the creation of, with a clear mandate, a commission to come up with a kind of a special education funding formula for new dollars. Now, it's not just a commission that doesn't really have any kind of requirements. There are specific percentages and targets in the law that they have to look at. So I'm hopeful that that's going to be a good product that comes out of that law that we created for special education. Charter school funding, it's really difficult, honestly. I mean, charter schools in some places, including in my own district, have provided an alternative for some folks to send their children that's excellent, and especially in places where the quality of the educational system and the environment surrounding it is not where it needs to be. Some of these charter schools have really done great work. But in the cyber charter area, we've heard that maybe the formula is a little too generous. There's something called, I think they call it a pension double dip. Let's not get into that, but there's an issue there with charter funding. So in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about charter school reform, changes to the law. We have not yet really done anything significant on that, despite some significant legislation on the subject. So I would say stay tuned. My guess is something will run on that, but precisely what, I haven't seen a bill yet that's moving.
Well, stay tuned, I guess, is the theme here for today, because this budget is coming and these issues are being worked on, and I'm sure your constituents can keep track of things through your website and other materials. And thank you so much for taking the time today to update them.
Thanks, Lori. Good to be here.
Well, if you have any comments or questions about these or any other topics, Representative Kampf's contact information will be on the screen in just a few seconds. I'm Laurie Bull. Thanks for watching, and join us again for Legislative Report.